for the rest of Europe, we thought that it was going to be southern France along the Riviera. But I think that was just a rumor that the Allies put out to throw people off, because this was planned across the English Channel. We didn't know it was going to be across the English Channel. We just knew it was coming, because everything that we manufactured was being sent to England at that time. They had there were battles going on in the Pacific, and I lost a number of friends in the islands in the Pacific, but all the attention was on Europe and Adolf Hitler. So because all of our supplies were going to England, we knew something was happening, but we didn't know what, and we didn't know when. And when it actually came, it was a surprise. I thought it would be later in the summer. I didn't expect it in June. It caught everybody in my neighborhood by surprise, and I guess that was the point of the whole thing. But once it happened, then we got a lot of news by the radio, only we got it late. They told us the day of the invasion, but they didn't release any casualty reports until much, much later. Not unlike the way it is in 2004 when we hear the same day that things happen. It would be weeks before we would hear bad news.
Did you ever think that the U.S. and the Allies might not win the war?
Yes, I did. When we were fighting in Italy, and we were still fighting the Italians and all the Germans, all of them, I didn't know. I wasn't sure. I wasn't confident. But there was nothing else to do except fight. You lost either way, so you had to keep fighting. But I wasn't sure that we would win. But after the invasion of Normandy, when we knew we could put all those thousands and thousands of men on the beach in Europe and fight their way across the beach, we knew we'd win.
Just didn't know how long it would take.
We had no idea how long, and it seemed like it would go on forever. The war started on December 7th, 1941 for the United States. Of course, the English had been fighting for years, but for us, December 7th, 1941. And 1942, well, we're at war. 1943, well, we're fighting all these battles in the Pacific, and it's going on. But 1944 and the invasion of Europe, and then it just seemed like they weren't making any progress. The winter of 1944, our armies were bogged down. The Germans made a breakthrough and surrounded a lot of our troops. Then we really didn't know, and I thought, is this going to go on all of my life? And I'm sure everybody felt that same way.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about when the war ended and what that day was like when you heard about victory in Europe.
When we heard about the first atomic bomb in Japan, we couldn't believe it. It was just beyond belief how much damage could be done. And I didn't recognize the significance of it. When the second bomb was dropped, we knew then this is not going to go on very long. This can't continue. Such devastation as this, and it didn't go on very long. So we knew from day to day, today might be the day, tomorrow might be the day, it's not going to be long. I was walking home from work one day, and I was about a block and a half from my house, and I looked up the street, and my mother was standing out in front of the house and wildly waving for me, come, come. Well, it had been announced that President Truman was going to be on the radio at a certain time to make an announcement, and everybody knew what it was going to be, and she wanted me to be home to hear it. So I ran the block and a half to get home. I made it, and I heard the president announce victory, and he just made a short speech, not very long, paid tribute to the people who had lost their lives in the war, and then told us all we still had a lot of work to do and not to quit yet. And when we turned off the radio, my mother and father and I just sat there and looked at each other. We waited so long, and it was just unbelievable. It's over. I couldn't believe it. I had bought my victory bottle of scotch a couple of years before. I decorated it with 10 yards of red, white, and blue ribbon, made like a hula skirt for it. Had kept that in my room for Victory Day. I couldn't even get my bottle of scotch. I was just drained, really. And my mother and father and I, we didn't eat that night. We just kind of sat around for a while. About an hour and a half later, our telephone rang, and it was my best friend on there. And she wanted to talk about the end of the war, and she said, well, you know, there's going to be a big celebration downtown. I think we should be there. And I said, well, I guess we should. So I said, I'll meet you down. She said, well, it's already been announced the buses are not going to run because they would be swamped with people. There's no transportation. And I said, well, we'll have to walk. I'll walk downtown and meet you there. So I changed clothes, and I did get my bottle then and took it downstairs. And my mother and father and I opened the bottle, and we each had some scotch to celebrate victory. And then I walked uptown to meet my friend, and by that time, all the streets in our downtown section had been blocked off by the police. There was a band playing at the courthouse. There were people everywhere, and people celebrating and just carrying on, because at last it was over. And my friend and I went over to where the band was, and we started to dance to the band music, and about that time it started to rain. But we just kept on dancing in the rain because this terrible, terrible war was over. I didn't go to work the next day because one of the things the president did was declare, I think it was a 2-day holiday. One day at least, but as I recall, we had 2 days of holiday. And we didn't have to go to work. And I just stayed home and rested. I was so happy. And then I went back to work, and I kept doing the same work, but, you know, they no longer needed the things we were making, and it was all over. And I knew I was going to be out of a job pretty soon, and I was. For one thing, they didn't need airplanes anymore. They didn't need field safes anymore. They didn't need anything that we were making. And another thing, men were starting to come home. They wanted jobs, and the feeling then was it was unpatriotic for a woman to keep a job when a man didn't have one. And so women were simply forced out. I didn't want to quit, but what they did was assign me to heavy physical labor to make me quit. And that's the way they made the women in my shop quit. They assigned us to heavy physical labor. A few of the women did it, not many did. We just simply knew, well, our jobs are over, and we'd go do something else. Gasoline rationing was released right away. Most people didn't have tires, though, on their cars because you couldn't buy new tires. That was one thing that started during World War II, was retreads on rubber tires. That was a big business. They quit the rationing of food. You could buy anything that you wanted at the grocery store. Clothing didn't change for quite a while because it took a while for the factories to switch over. The big switch that everybody wanted was for the factories to quit making trucks and tanks and start making cars again. I think half the United States wanted a new car, and of course all the servicemen coming home had been dreaming of owning a car. So that was the big thing, switch over to making cars. There was just a lot of release because this was finally ended.
Is there anything else that I should ask you, or anything else that you'd like to add to the
Well,
subject?
when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, as I said earlier, I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was or what it was. And then all these things happened, and I didn't know why. And as it turned out, this World War II changed my life so completely from what it normally would have been that I made up my mind I wasn't going to be this unknowing again and not know why things happen. And I started reading newspapers, the front pages of newspapers, so that when something big happened again, I would at least have some idea of why this is happening to us. And I've tried to keep that up so that I know why we are where we are today.
I want to thank you, Mrs. Conyers, for agreeing to do this interview, and also thank you for all the contributions you made during the World War II years.